Good afternoon and welcome to IBA News this Monday, the 25th of July. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy, joining you live from Jerusalem. We open with the ongoing trial of Sergeant Elor Azaria, who is giving evidence for a second day at the Jaffa military court against manslaughter charges for shooting a neutralized Palestinian terrorist in Hebron in March. During cross-examination, Azaria charged that the IDF commanders who previously testified against him had given false testimony. He said his company commander was a 100% liar and accused the brigade commander of having partially lied and forgotten details of the event. Throughout questioning, Azaria maintained he believed his life was in danger when he shot the terrorist. He struggled, however, to definitively answer questions regarding a claim he made yesterday against his company commander, whom he accused of slapping him following the shooting. The prosecution intimated that Azaria fabricated the account, grilling him on why he had failed to previously mention the incident. Azaria defended himself, claiming he originally didn't remember the slapping due to the heat and confusion of the moment, and that details returned to him only later, particularly when reviewing photographs of the site with his lawyers. The prosecution has now asked the defense to provide witnesses who can testify on this development. The cross-examination will continue through tomorrow as well. Responding to questions regarding the Azaria trial, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman said today that the government should refrain from expressing any position until the end of proceedings. Speaking at an induction based in Tel HaShomer this morning, Lieberman criticized his predecessor, Moshe Ya'alon, saying he made a big mistake by determining, quote, from the outset that the soldier was wrong before the inquiry had even begun. Cypriot President Nikos Anastasiades met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday night in Jerusalem. The two leaders spoke about the fight against terrorism, cooperation in times of emergency, and, crucially, the development of energy sources, including natural gas fields. Solving the differences between Turkey and Cyprus, they agreed, would hasten the advancement of future projects and enhance regional stability. Israel is interested in selling its natural gas to Turkey, and the meeting was intended to lay the groundwork for an eventual gas pipeline to Turkey via Cypriot territorial waters, which Cyprus is reportedly opposing. It was agreed that the energy ministers of both states would meet in September to work out an arrangement on the matter. Haredi elementary schools will not be required to teach the core curriculum after all if the Knesset approves the government's plans to reverse key legislation passed by the previous government. Yesterday, the Ministerial Committee for Legislation approved a bill to annul the landmark reform secured by Yesh Atid, which would have required Haredi elementary schools to provide at least 11 weekly hours of English, maths and science, or else lose state funding. The U-turn represents the fulfillment of a clause in the coalition agreement with the Haredi United Torah Judaism Party. The U-turn drew fire from within the coalition, with Science Minister Ofir Akunis of Likud arguing that the universal application of the core curriculum is necessary for Israel to continue to be one of the leading and groundbreaking countries around the world. Following much political wrangling, an apparent compromise has been reached regarding the fate of the new Israel Broadcasting Corporation, which is tentatively set to begin operations on the 1st of May next year. Prime Minister Netanyahu, who also serves as Communications Minister, agreed with Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon to delay the opening of the IBC and thus the closure of the Israel Broadcasting Corporation away from the end of the upcoming September as planned. The compromise overturns the 1.5-year extension announced only last week. That decision drew harsh criticism from ministers who charged Netanyahu with wasting public money and hurting freedom of expression in Israel. The Communications Ministry and Treasury are expected to finalize deals of the agreement in the coming days. According to the compromise, the government will be authorized to advance the opening of the new corporation by decree from the 1st of January 2017 if the IBC says it is ready to launch. The IBC welcomed the decision, promising it would be ready in time. Responding to developments, the head of the Histadrut Labour Federation, Avi Nissenkorn, said he remains committed to implementing the reform in the most responsible manner, out of concern for the more than 1,200 current workers of the IBA whose future remains uncertain. Also in doubt is the future of English language broadcasting when the IBA will officially shut down. No decision has yet been made on whether the new corporation will include English language news in its programming at all. In Israel, school children attending summer camps can expect sports and arts and crafts. In the Gaza Strip, however, play guerrilla warfare is order of the day. IBA's Margot Dudkevich has this report on the training camps run by Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades for school children in neighbouring Gaza.
Waging jihad or holy war for the sake of Allah is the focus of this year's Hamas's Vanguards of Liberation summer camp in Gaza, aimed at training young Palestinians to use firearms and other military skills in preparation for what is described as the road to freedom and victory, with the simple goal of preparing the young generation to join the ranks of the terrorist organization in the future. School-aged children are taught to fight against the Zionist occupation. Some of the children interviewed said they intend to continue on the path of martyrs. Others say they are preparing for the final battle against Israel's occupation. On hand to instruct the youth are masked members of the Hamas military wing. Hamas has also opened a special instruction program for women in Gaza, training them to load firearms and shoot. The terrorist organization that is committed to Israel's destruction also offered locals an additional summer attraction this year, recently opening one of their attack tunnels for public viewing. At the entrance to the tunnel located near the North Gaza neighborhood of Sajaya, Hamas exhibited weapons used against Israeli forces during the 2014 Operation Protective Edge. While the West calls on Israel and the Palestinians to return to the negotiating table in the hopes of reaching a peace deal, Hamas continues to incite against Israel, teaching the future Palestinian generation in Gaza to hate. Margot Dudkevich, IBA News.
A Syrian national whose asylum application was rejected by German authorities blew himself up yesterday at the entrance to a music festival in the South German town of Ansbach near Nuremberg, killing himself and injuring 12 people. 5 of the injured were said to be in serious condition. According to the Bavarian Interior Minister, the 27-year-old Syrian donated the device in his backpack after he was refused entry to the music festival, from which 2,500 people were evacuated after the explosion. Last night's suicide bombing occurred just hours after another Syrian refugee armed with a machete killed a pregnant woman in Reutlingen near Stuttgart and injured 2. Police arrested the 21-year-old terrorist after he was knocked down by a motorist. According to police, the assailant was known to authorities and had previously been involved in violence. These latest attacks are expected to heighten tension surrounding Chancellor Angela Merkel's open door policy, which has seen over 1 million migrants entering Germany from wars or conflicts in Afghanistan, Syria and Iraq. Joining me now in the studio is Greg Roman, director of the Middle East Forum, to try to make sense of what's going on in our region and Europe. Greg, welcome.
Thank you.
We just heard the news of 2 attacks yesterday in Germany by Syrian refugees, asylum seekers. What's motivating these people to commit attacks in the countries where they're seeking asylum?
So when we look at the lack of a examination mechanism that's taking place between the open borders that Turkey once had between itself and Bulgaria, the Aegean Sea, the Adriatic, all depending on where they were going, and the eventual ambition of these refugees to get to an area not where they just felt there was economic opportunity, but also where they had the opportunity to have cultural affinity with other populations that might be part of them, there was the deprivation of a mechanism which led to the ability for these migrants to also have certain radical fringes that were taken through in their ability to infiltrate Western liberal mechanisms for integrating migrants. But in this case, we saw some with extremist sympathies being able to get through that filtration mechanism. And in doing so, we now have the result of those who are feeling disenfranchised by the German state, whether they're lone wolf attackers or they're affiliated with an organization like ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra or another terrorist organization, and they're either being educated on the internet, they were educated when they were in Syria, they were educated when they were in refugee camps, or they may have been able to pick up their extremist inclinations in Germany or in France itself. So we now see a 1-year period from the open migrant policy which had taken place, and even 1 out of 1 million causing an attack is still at the dead Germans.
It's deeply disturbing. Moving to Turkey, the scale and speed of President Erdogan's purge in the wake of the failed coup has surprised many. How long has he been planning this, and what exactly is he aiming for?
So Fethullah Gulen and Erdogan go back to the early 90s, even to the late 80s when Erdogan was elected mayor of Istanbul. They had planned a 2-step process, one through which Erdogan would work through government and Gulen would work through the Hizmet organization, trying
Could you
to...
just elaborate briefly? Who is this Fethullah Gulen?
Sure. So
we hear so much about him.
Fethullah Gulen was the son of a Turkish imam that was ejected from the Ottoman structure in 1924. He was born in Izmir and eventually grew up in Istanbul. And he was part of a family, of a group of Turks that had the ability to not necessarily take part in Ataturk's secular state. So he saw that it was his ambition to learn what was then a certain Sufi version of Islam within Turkey, but eventually to take the precepts of what he learned and create a structure that would be able to advocate for it, to increase the involvement of his version of Islam within Turkish society. He meets a young aspiring politician,
And he backed Erdogan.
This young politician being Erdogan, and he provided the, let's call it, nonprofit and religious sector support for Erdogan to create what was then another political party, which eventually became the AKP, which is the party that now rules over Turkey. And they worked together on trying to get rid of what they call the deep state, the influence of the military and the police on secular parts of society. They did it so far to put thousands of individuals, former military officials and police officials, in jail in 2007 and 2008 in the sledgehammer scandal. That alliance broke in 2013 when Gulen realized that Erdogan was only in it for political power rather than trying to transform Turkish society into Hizmet.
So was Gulen behind this failed coup?
There's no way of knowing whether he was behind it. But the way in which it was enacted was so amateurish that there seemed as if though there was no actual coordination at the top levels of the military, that there was only a section of it. Maybe it was a last-minute attempt before August meeting that was scheduled to take place before the coup, which was being organized to
So where do you see Erdogan pushing this right now? Where's he heading?
Erdogan probably already had these lists prior to him enacting this counter-coup response. I think he's trying to not just root out any support for the Gulen movement, he's trying to use them as a scapegoat to root out any opposition to AKP support, whether it be secularists, whether it be Republicans, whether it be those who are just against the idea of more Islam within Turkish democracy.
Now, Greg, moving away from Turkey, There was a delegation last week in Israel of prominent Saudi officials led by a former Saudi general. What can we read into this?
I think the first thing we have to do is to applaud Dori Gold's efforts, the Director General of the Foreign Ministry, from taking track 2 negotiations from below the radar and making them more public now. We see that the Palestinians are no longer the Arab world's main concern. It's the survival of Arab regimes that have to be able to take the foremost front against the rise of Islamism, whether it be in Turkey or Syria or Iraq. But the willing partner they're finding in the battle against Sunni Islamists, and also the rising specter of the threat of Iran, is Israel, a common friend against a common enemy.
Well, this is certainly a big breakthrough to have a former Saudi general coming. Can we expect a further breakthrough in terms of official endorsement from the Saudi regime? I mean, this is obviously being done without
Don't just look at what the Saudis are doing. Also look at the visit of the Egyptian foreign minister, the first visit in a 10-year period by a senior Egyptian official to the country. Look at the breaking of ties right now between Jordan and some of their less responsible allies within the Arab world. And also look at the Arab League conference that's taking place right now, where they're calling for the ability for the Palestinians to be accepting a solution with Israel. It's the first time that the Palestinians and the Israelis are being expected to have mutual pressure.
On the subject of the Arab League, precisely, which opens today in Mauritania, we understand that Egyptian President Sisi is not attending, and apparently Egyptian intelligence forces managed to foil an attempted assassination attempt against him. How stable is Sisi's regime?
I think that Sisi's regime, at least the way in which he's been able to enscone himself with support of the military and also the interior ministry, for the time being is stable. However, when we look at the lack of subsidies going from the Suez Canal, the lack of tourism dollars, the lack of revenue coming from the oil and natural gas in the Sinai, and just general unrest, not with Sisi so much, but more the inability to feed the Egyptian populace. Unless Egypt goes through a major economic reform program, they're not going to be able to be the country that they have the promise to be, especially considering what faces them in the future.
And very briefly, do you expect Egypt to rise to that challenge?
I hope so. We don't really have another choice being here in Israel and having failure be an option.
We all pray for the best. Greg, thank you very much.
Thank you, Elon.
Turning to the United States, where the Democratic Party was thrown into disarray on the eve of its national convention, which kicks off tonight in Philadelphia. Democratic National Committee head Debbie Wasserman Schultz announced her resignation amid anger over a second email scandal. Correspondence, part of thousands of emails leaked by the WikiLeaks organization website, revealed that DNC officials had explored ways to undermine the presidential campaign of Hillary Clinton's rival, Senator Bernie Sanders, seemingly confirming his frequent charges that the DNC was playing favorites in the race. Clinton's campaign has accused Russia of being behind the leak, citing experts who suspect the Kremlin hackers stole the emails in a bid to support the presidential bid of Donald Trump, who has said he would not necessarily honor a commitment to defend NATO allies if attacked by Russia. Trump rejected the suggestions as a joke on Twitter. The resignation put a major damper on the Democratic Convention, which is set to crown Hillary Clinton as the party's official nominee at long last in the race for the White House. Closer to home, 250 Israelis and an equal number of Palestinians sat down at tables on Tel Aviv's Rothschild Boulevard to discuss and debate the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Last Friday's event was organized by the non-governmental organization Minds of Peace, whose aim is to involve the public in peacemaking by establishing an Israeli-Palestinian negotiating congress. Organizers said the aim is to make the country's leadership aware that the public supports it in the peace process. Israelis and Palestinians from different walks of life were given the opportunity to meet face-to-face and air their grievances. Palestinians from Nablus, Bethlehem, Ramallah and surrounding West Bank areas overcame their fears of judgment by neighbors for participating in the dialogue. Enough politics and heat from those seeking a respite from the summer heat. The Space Festival at Madda Tech, the country's National Museum of Science and Technology and Space in Haifa, is the place to go. Currently on display at the museum is the Almaz spacecraft, part of the former USSR space program. The project, in collaboration with the Heinlein Society and the Israeli Ramon Foundation, aims to encourage civilian and commercial activity in space and plans within 2 years to select youth who will be able to send their experiments into space. On hand to answer questions was American astronaut Dr. Don Thomas and Dr. John Clark, an expert on medicine in space, whose wife, the late Dr. Laurel Clark, died in the Columbia spaceship crash along with Israeli astronaut Ilan Ramon.
I've seen Israel many times passing overhead, but this is my first time here. When I was 6, the first American astronaut went into space, so it was a dream of mine that started when I was very, very small. So if we can get that same dream going in these young students today, there's no reason in the future why they couldn't be the first astronaut to go to an asteroid, maybe the first astronaut on the planet Mars.
How exciting. Water levels in the Sea of Galilee have hit their lowest levels since 2012. The waterline is now only 1 centimetre above the lower red line at 212.99 metres below sea level. The lower levels of water pumping from the lake over the last year appear to have been offset by increased pumping upstream in the rivers spilling into the Kinneret. The fear is that once levels hit the red line again, the freshwater lake will experience an increase in salinity from subterranean saltwater streams that could then be released, at which point pumping will be forbidden. With temperatures set to rise in August, it's now a virtual certainty that water levels will soon dip below that red line. Israel isn't the only one celebrating its 68th birthday this year. So is Snooty, the world's oldest manatee who lives in Florida. Born in captivity, the whiskered sea cow marked his birthday at the Parker Manatee Aquarium, which is also a rehabilitation facility for the endangered species. There are now an estimated 6,300 manatees living along Florida's warm coastline, compared to just 1,000 20 years ago. Mazel tov, Snooty. In finance, shares are up on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, and the shekel is mixed in foreign currency trading. And in weather, tomorrow we'll see a further rise in temperatures, becoming unseasonably warm in the mountains and inner regions. It will also, of course, be muggy along the coast.